Hi, I'm Femi OK and you're in the stream. Today, the Australian government is fighting to curb the number of its nationals taking up arms with groups like Islamic State. But will new counter-terrorism measures protect or discriminate against Muslims? So this counter-terrorism conversation in Australia kind of goes back to the beginning of August. Malika Bilal is our digital producer. You've been following it online. What are you seeing?
I've been following it since then. And as you know, Femi, every morning we put out a call to our community online for them to send us stories that they're following and that they want us to turn into shows. Sarah did that on Facebook. She wrote this: Muslims in Australia are now being targeted by new so-called anti-terrorism laws. So we're going to debate that topic, Sarah, today. And for those of you at home, if you'd like to join this conversation, send us your tweets with hashtag AJStream.
And if you have a story you'd like to see us discuss right here on the stream, just let us know. Go to Google+, tell us about your idea, and it could end up in the stream. Now, there are lots of hot stories that we're following, and here are a few of the ones we're watching very closely. This photograph of Khalid Sharif's young son holding the severed head of a Syrian soldier has highlighted the issue of Australians fighting in foreign conflicts. There are reports that up to 60 Australians have taken up arms in Syria and Iraq with groups like Islamic State. Per capita, that's more than any other country, according to Australian intelligence agencies. In response, the Australian government has introduced a new bill aimed at curbing this phenomenon and preventing what they see as an increased risk of homegrown terrorism. Muslims have criticised the measures, claiming that they will be unjustly targeted and discriminated against, in part because these new laws would create a presumption of guilt, requiring citizens to prove what they were doing when they get back from hotspots like Syria and Iraq, even if they were there to visit family or do humanitarian work. So, will these measures feed Islamophobia in Australia? Joining us to talk about this, Silma Hiram. She is president of the Australian Muslim Women's Association. She joins us from Sydney. Also in Sydney, Dr. Jamal Rifi is a Muslim community leader. Jason Morrison is a radio host and columnist with the Daily Telegraph. And with us from Melbourne, Yasser Morsi is a researcher at the University of South Australia. He's also with the Centre for Muslim and Non-Muslim Understanding. So it's great to have you all here in the stream, everybody. We are talking about Australian fighters, foreign fighters, in, for instance, groups like Islamic State. I want to show you exactly what some of them look like. This is a little promo video by Islamic State, and here are some of the Australian fighters.
All my brothers in Australia, I don't see myself better than any of you. And alhamdulillah, it's only that Allah has been Kareem on me and He's bringing me here to this country. So this is the message I wanna send to you. A message that inshallah from a Muslim brother's heart to another brother's heart.
إخوتي in the West, in wherever it may be, Europe, in Australia, in America. The reasons for coming to jihad, the reasons are plenty.
So Jason, these are Aussies. When you see Australians fighting in Syria, what's that gut reaction you get as an Australian?
I go a step further than that. They're not just Australians, they are Australians that have been born here in Australia. And not to say that there's necessarily a categoric difference, but if you have left a land to come to Australia and then decided that you want to be back involved in the politics of that land, I guess that's kind of an understandable emotion. But if your roots to these lands or these problems happen to just be in an emotional sense, that worries me, because these are young men who grew up in the suburbs of my city and cities like Melbourne as well. And I just wonder how you end up getting views like this that you want to from a free and open society where you can pretty much do whatever you like in a country like Australia, to want to go and fight in something that to me is so ridiculously foreign to anyone who calls themselves an Australian.
Yasser, ridiculously foreign. Do you understand the context in which these young men would leave Australia and go to somewhere as dangerous as Syria to fight?
Well, firstly, I bring into contest how open and free Australia is to certain debates. I mean, of course, we're free within a certain cage in regards to what we can and cannot say about the government. The context is well known.
That's not true, Yusri. That's not true. We are an open society and we can work with that.
And there's a prime example. The moment I dissent, I get shut down. If I can finish, the point here is about the context is well known. There's anger, there's frustration. Whether it's right or wrong is another debate. But if we're talking about the catalysts of why young Muslims feel like they need to fight, I think everybody knows. And it's in the backdrop of wars in Iraq, it's in the backdrop of the Middle East, and there's multiple conflicts.
All right, Dr. Jamal, what did you want to say?
Look, I want to say a few things. First of all, Femi, in your introduction, you made a very common mistake about these laws. You said that they are reversing the onus of proof. That is not correct. And also, you said that actually they take away the presumption of innocence. That is not correct. I have met with the Attorney General, and without any doubt, he told us that these two things remain as a cornerstone of the Australian legal system. And one of the things I need to say at the same time, there is a lot of fear and a lot of misconception about these laws. If we are going to talk about them, let's talk about them frankly, openly, but also with knowledge. And so far, what Yusri have said, that there is a lot of fear and like living in a cage and there is no debate, that is not true. We have asked the Prime Minister of Australia to meet with the Muslims community, and he did. The Muslim community asked that they want to meet with the Attorney General. So immediately, in 2 weeks' time, they made that appointment, and we discussed this issue with the Attorney General openly and frankly, and, and the issue has been in the media day in and day out. So what sort of debate he's not happy with?
All right, hold on tight.
Yeah, good for you, Jamal. Good for you, mate, because that needs to be said. Good on you.
All right, so hold tight for a moment. I'm just going to go back to community and then I'll come straight back to a discussion amongst our guests.
Right. Well, I actually want to pick up on a point that Yasser made about everyone knows why people are going. And online, there are some who agree with you. Hanan explains her reasons of why she's seen people going. She says it's multifaceted. Government positions on foreign policy, a false sense of duty, poor religious understanding, untreated mental illness. But Silma, I don't think it's fair for all of our community members to say that they all know why. So would you pinpoint some factors as to why you think people are going over?
I think it's a very attractive thing for disaffected young men. Unfortunately, most of the young men who have been highlighted, particularly in the social media and the unfortunate picture of the child holding a head of somebody who's been beheaded. These people have already got a criminal background. They're already well known. And I guess the biggest issue for us is, whereas we are also concerned about the growth of this movement, which is very far from the truth about Islam and is perverting a lot of the teachings of Islam. At the same time, we're concerned about the government's action. Yes, the government is meeting with a number of members of the community, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the government is considering the effect that it will have on the community fully. And we've already seen that people have been taken off aircraft, and from the accounts that I've heard, they were taken off in front of other passengers, not pulled aside discreetly, but they were marched off a plane, and they were not on their way to Lebanon, they were on their way to Malaysia, and they were released afterwards, and there will probably be substantial compensation. They've already had their tickets repurchased at the government's cost, and there have been no charges laid. So this idea that the onus of proof will actually be on the person themselves is clear from what the government has already been enacting in practice. We haven't seen the legislation, it hasn't gone to Parliament, and yet there are already people being pulled off planes. So this is a huge concern. If we lose our civil liberties, that's what our concern is.
Hang on.
All right, so I can see you all speaking in order.
So here and say...
Hold tight for a moment. I know that Yasser was going to jump in, then Doctor, and then Jason, because I could just all see you piping up one at a time. Yasser, go first.
Well, thank you. I agree with Silma on her point, and I think it's naivety at its highest to suggest that, well, we've spoken to government and they've told us it's all okay. Anybody who's any understanding of how the political system works will recognize that there is an existing speculation and suspicion about Muslims, and we as a community have an obligation to make sure that the suspicion doesn't spill over into discrimination. It is clearly naive to say, look, Muslims will not be targeted and this law is as neutral as it can come. And it's also clearly, I think, almost to the point of insensitive to suggest that Muslims are oversensitive. We've endured 15 years of the same conversation, 15 years where, when discussing violence, we become the site of scrutiny, we become the site of suspicion, our community has to police itself. And to therefore dismiss all of these things with a sigh and claim we're an open society and parrot the
No, yes, I'll tell you why I sigh. I sigh because you kind of pretend that this is all unnecessary scrutiny. Mate, there is a problem, and you know there is a problem. The problem is being played out on our television screens. I'm sure you're aware that there are tiny corners, thankfully only tiny corners in the community where there's a problem. Now, we can do one of two things. We can kind of say, oh, this is too hard to deal with and look away, or we can say, let's address it. And, you know, I do take exception to these anecdotal stories of people being taken from planes because it doesn't match what the government is reporting. And I know that there'll be people in this discussion who are suspicious about what the government is reporting. I tend to think this is a fairly open and a fairly upfront country where you can't actually do too many things and get away with it, and you can't actually come to the conclusion that the government is involved in some giant...
Everything you've said has come from a position of privilege. Until you've lived as a Muslim in the last 15 years, you cannot come up to me and tell me bluntly like this that it's all above board, it's all okay. We have direct stories.
Yeah, so I live a life in this country as an Australian, and I hope you live the life in this country as an Australian. I don't think of myself as my religion. You don't even necessarily know what my religion is. It's not relevant in this discussion to me.
All right, gentlemen, let me just get us back on track for a moment. I understand what you're talking about, which is the atmosphere in which you feel that Muslims are being treated in Australia, or maybe not being treated in Australia. Let's get back to the foreign fighters theme, though. Malika.
Well, there's so much to debate about this, but not a lot of understanding on what these measures are. And so that's where our community is taking us. Matt online says huge intelligence organizations overreach with no oversight. That's how he describes the measure. Sagal on Twitter says, I'm concerned with the level of intelligence gathering, possibly endangering civil liberties of people. So, Dr. Jamal, what is actually being proposed?
First of all, people being taken out from their plane has nothing to do with the proposed anti-terror law. These are existing laws because the new anti-terror laws have not been tabled as yet. That's one. The second, if there is any issues about people's civil liberties, we are working with the government, we are entering in this dialogue. But more dangerously, our young people have been targeted through the internet and to brainwash them, and we need these laws, first of all, to protect any terror action taking place on Australian soil. Second, we may need to prevent these young people from their own mistake, and we may use them to save them from their own mistakes. And as I said, we are working with the detail with the government. If security agencies need some powers, we should give them just enough powers.
Okay, so Dr. Jamal, what is just enough? What is just enough?
Well, that's why we enter in this dialogue. Yeah. I'll give you an example. We spoken with the Attorney General about camera surveillance inside home. And we have said that this will infringe on our women when they are not covered their head and that sort of things. And he has taken, to his credit, he has taken that on board, and he's going to work with us to change the legislation. Now, if they need any monitoring, they could use audio monitoring rather than an in-home videos monitoring, because that's the way it impacts on us. The second, we have spoken about these zones where people are going to go, a declared zone, and if they're going to return, they're going to be questioned.
Right.
And we added that if there is an Islamic shrine they need to go and visit or a pilgrimage to do, that should be an exemption. He has taken it on board. We have entered this dialogue, and it's government look at what legislation they need. They present it to Parliament. Parliament will debate it, and there will be a Senate joint committee, and then changes will be made.
All right,
they
Dr.
have
Mal,
taken
take
one
a breath
step
for a
extra.
moment. All right,
But just what taken one step extra.
Right, I
they
understand.
have consulting with our community even well before giving these legislation to Parliament.
Silma?
Yes, I've got a few issues. Firstly, with Jason, whereas I understand that we like to think that we're an open society, if you look at how, for example, the refugees are being treated in Manus Island and Nauru, you can see that there's a lot of secrecy in decisions that the government considers that might be unpopular. So whereas we pride ourselves
however,
on being an open
with
democratic
respect to that,
society, this is not always the case.
But hang on, with respect to that, I mean, that is absolutely separate and frankly irrelevant to this discussion. In line with Australian citizens and the treatment, no, it is actually. With respect to how Australian citizens are treated by their government, it's a pretty open society.
All right, Silma, I do agree with Jason because we have a limited amount of time. We talk about foreign fighters, the counter-terrorism measures in Australia. What do you want to add to this conversation that we're having right now?
That I'm concerned is, for example, with the new laws that are being proposed. At the moment, there is sufficient law. As we've been able to see, the government has the capacity to march people off a plane. The ability to monitor, the ability to collect data, there's so many rules that already exist, laws existing, that where they can, the intelligence community has sufficient power to protect Australian civilians.
Right.
Now, the difficulty we've got is that with the new laws that are coming in, under the accountability that the police have and various other departments have, this does not apply to the AFP. So the laws are going way beyond what we believe that are needed, and they're not going to be effective. They're going to actually cause more problems. If we want to use these laws to protect, or as Dr. Jamal said, to stop young people from being involved, it's going to do the opposite.
Right.
It's going to make them feel more marginalised and cause them to be more radicalised and more susceptible to listening to that angry message which is empowering for disaffected young people. It's not the answer. It's not going to help, and it's going to further erode civil liberties for all Australians, not just for Muslims, but for all Australians.
All right, so
that's what our concern is.
Let me just bring in the community again. Malika.
Well, there's a question here on Twitter, Femi. This is from Leon. He writes, without doubt, it's discriminatory, but are there similar restrictions on Aussies joining other militaries? And that brings us to a statement that several Muslim communities put out, and Silma and Yasser, you were among those who signed on to this, in which you wrote, it is instructive that similar issues about Australian troops traveling abroad to fight or Jews traveling to train or fight with the Israeli Defense Force are simply never raised. So Jason, are those concerns valid that this is being applied discriminately?
Yeah, I kind of loosely agree with that. I mean, I don't think we should be, if you're an Australian citizen, turning a blind eye to a particular group to go and join a foreign army for whatever reason. I mean, if you signed up here, you signed up here. Your loyalties to this nation firstly, and I would be inclined to say, yeah, I'm with that. I frankly think, the Australian Jewish community needs to have a bit of a look at that, because it's a double standard, and though I see one as an army with a democratic government and the other one as an army of who knows what, I think it is a double standard, and we should apply rule to all.
There's a phrase.
I think a better law would be that we, instead of discriminating against those people who may be going overseas for a purpose which may lead them towards these conflict areas, I think it'd be better if we had laws which prohibited any Australian fighting in a war that was, or in any army that was not under the Australian Defence Force. That would then be a fair and non-discriminatory law, and it would ensure then that people who travel overseas, if they went overseas and engaged in any kind, and there's plenty of surveillance that we have, and these people are promoting their activities on social media, so it's not hard to find out who's doing what before they come back. They would know then that if they engage in this kind of activity, that they could lose their citizenship, or they could be arrested when they return. And that would be fair. That would cover everybody, no matter whether it's Sierra Leone or Sri Lanka or Ukraine at the moment. So many hotspots we have around the world.
Okay, Yasser.
Can I just add, look, there's a danger that we begin to discuss these laws as a thing in themselves, and outside of the context, again, of 10 to 15 years where Muslims have been put under a scrutiny regarding violence. Now, insofar as much as we begin to talk about these laws in a rational sense about what they can provide in regards to security or how they should be applied across the board, that's one debate, but that debate cannot be had outside of what Muslims have had to endure.
All right,
and that's
so Yasser, you said that and you made that point very clearly right at the beginning of the conversation. Here's something for you though. Hold on a minute, Dr. Jamal. I want to show our audience this. This is Mohammed Elama with a severed head. I'm just going to show you this picture here. So Yasser, you gave us the context. You said we need to understand how Muslims are being treated in Australia. So what would you do to stop pictures like this getting out and about, Australian young men going to fight in Syria? What would you do?
Well, this is precisely the point. The threat of these pictures, as gruesome as they are, and by no means of any defense, they become our entry point into very complex debates, and we skew these debates, and we enter through sensational points. If we want to understand the source
All right, so you're not making any sensational points right now, but what would you do?
Change the conversation. We cannot continually be talking about these images as an entry point into a very, very complex debate. And that's what happens. There is a threat of ISIS. Let's put that on the table.
Right.
But there's also another threat, and that is the way we talk about ISIS, the way people exploit ISIS, the way people use Islamophobia to frame the discussion about ISIS. Right. And it ultimately comes back to affect innocent Muslims here and abroad. So yeah, look, I can easily follow suit here and beat the drum about how we've got a threat. We all know that. There are plenty of people fighting this threat. But my obligation, unlike Jamal Rifi, is not to assume and adopt the position of government. My obligation is to protect a minority from the encroachment of a state, to protect the minority from the proliferation of Islamophobia, to protect the minority from...
So I would have thought as an Australian you would be interested in the broader security of all Australians, the broader security of all, not just a minority, the broader security of all, because that's what I'm into.
As an Australian,
but that minority is even the greatest risk to us. People. These are our young daughters and girls that have been brainwashed by these black ideas. These minorities are greatest risk.
Again, note the difference. What we have on one side is this sensationalist sentiment about protecting our security and being Australian.
Why do you think it's sensationalist, Yasser?
It's not sensational. Stop playing the victim card all the time with this, mate. It's reality. It's reality, and Australians deserve protection by their government.
Of course they do.
But the barbaric state is dictating the conversation with showing all these beheading that's taken place. We all know in our religion that any captive will have to be...
All right, gentlemen, guests, one at a time. Yes, just hold tight for a moment so I can hear you. Dr. Jamal, make a very quick point. I'm talking about a one-sentence point. Then we'll hear Yasser. Go ahead, Dr. Jamal.
The one who are dictating the conversation is this barbaric state, by showing this severe head and making it, doing it in the name of Islam. They have hijacking our religion.
All right, Yasser, how did you want to respond to that?
There's plenty of people. If you're aware that they're dictating the conversation, then don't follow their suit. There's plenty of opportunists, and you know all about this, who have used these images to project their own political agenda. And all I am saying, and I don't think it's a controversial point, if we want to have a proper discussion about the source of violence, if we want a proper discussion about security, let's not start and begin with sensationalist claims like it's all about lunatics and barbarity. That language is entirely unhelpful.
All right, and just for the record here, there are about 60 Australian foreign fighters in Syria fighting with Islamic State and 22 million Australians. So you do the mathematics, it's a very small proportion of people, but there is this debate about how big a threat might they be to Australia. We are taking the rest of this conversation online to stream.aljazeera.com, but before we get there, Malika.
Well, just a taste on what the debate looks like online, where it is ongoing. Tara says the Muslim community have a responsibility as Australians to aid the government in stopping extremism. But someone else raises this point. Mohammed on Twitter says it's rather unfortunate that Muslims all over the world are targeted in the guise of anti-terrorism, tackle terrorism, and not Muslims.
Do you have something to add? It's not too late. Hashtag AJStream. Malika will be looking out for your tweet. Meanwhile, on the next show, protesters in Hong Kong vow to continue their fight for democracy. But how tolerant will China be? We'll discuss Hong Kong's Occupy Central movement, but that will be on Monday. Stay with us. The post show is next. Stream.aljazeera.com. Malika and I will see you there. Thanks for watching. Hello, welcome to the Stream's online post show. We're carrying on our discussion on Australia's new counter-terrorism measures and what they mean for Muslims. With us to discuss this, just to remind you, Silma Iram. She is the president of the Australian Muslim Women's Association. Dr. Jamal Rifi is a Muslim community leader. Jason Morrison, radio host and columnist with the Daily Telegraph. And Yasser Morsi is a researcher at the University of South Australia. Something we didn't get into in the main conversation, so much to talk about. Team Australia. That phrase made a lot of people have a big debate. Let me just show you part of the context for it. This is Prime Minister Tony Abbott talking about Team Australia on the morning show Sunrise. Have a listen to this.
You don't migrate to this country unless you want to join our team, and that's the point I'll be stressing.
So do you get there, Jason, what the Prime Minister was trying to say? That was on August the 22nd when he was trying to clarify what Team Australia actually meant. Do you think it was a good way to describe the situation in Australia?
Yeah, I understand how people kind of hear that and they think it's sort of trivialising something, but the core message is, I mean, I think what the man said, take out the Team Australia and insert whatever you find as an acceptable identifier. I mean, to me, you don't have to put the word team in front of it. It's about Australia. It's about Australia and the connection with it. And I kind of like how we've turned into a debate about, oh, did he use the wrong phrase or whatever else. Yeah. Listen to the fundamental message. The fundamental message is, you know, if you come to Australia, you choose to live in Australia, or you've been saved by Australia because Australia has accepted you from peril, I would think it would be very hard to find a reason to dislike this country.
Well, I think there's a big problem with a lot of the language and the rhetoric that's been used around this. The issue is that either you're part of the team or you're not part of the team, and the implication is that Islam and Muslims are potentially not part of the team. And this falls into this whole debate which ISIS is carrying, that Islam represents barbaric actions. By following into this rhetoric, we are accepting that this is a fact, and Muslims do not accept this as a fact. If we say this is criminal, let's target criminality and leave Muslims and Islam out of it, we are essentially denying the debate that ISIS is trying to have, that it is a violent religion. They are perverting our religion. And we're falling into the same trap by focusing on Muslims all the time instead of saying criminal action is criminal action and dealing with criminal action. That is a different debate, and we're not having that debate.
I totally understand that, and look, you know, I mean, I have a number of friends who identify, you know, religiously as being Muslim, but they identify with being Australian as their fundamental starting point, and I understand how it could be taken the wrong way, but we're not just talking about the religion, we're talking about a radical perspective of the religion, and we're trying to protect Australia from radicalism and radicalised people and people who have a fascist view about how the religion should progress and whatever else. I'm not sure that those people are sitting on this panel having this discussion right now. In fact, you know, what I hear are people who want fundamentally, I hope, the best for the country, and that's
absolutely.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Well, Yasser, I hear you trying to get in, and I actually want to direct something to you. This is a video comment from someone talking about this issue, and they say that this is more than just a distraction from the fundamental issue. They say this is a problem of rhetoric. So have a listen to this video comment.
Australia's proposed counter-terrorism measures will protect Muslims as it will protect all Australians. But it's being introduced by a government and in a context of Team Australia, which is promoting a kind of assimilationist monoculturalism that will in the end discriminate against Muslims. We need to be inclusive and join everyone together.
Yasser, is this divisive rhetoric?
Absolutely. I mean, look at the way Jason described it. He actually used the word save. I mean, look, he's accused me of trying to play victim, and I can easily rebut that by saying white people need to stop trying to play savior. This idea that we've come from the outside, we're coming back in to enter, we've been allowed a shelter, and we've all belonged to Australia. The reality is, the hard cold reality is, Australia is not the same place for everyone. You can ask Indigenous Australians, you can ask migrants, you can ask an array of minorities, and we have to speak about a complex political system where it's not equal. It's very easy to, you know, espout these crude nationalisms to gain popularity and scapegoat a minority as a threat.
Crude nationalisms. You're kidding.
Absolutely.
If you are a refugee and you're fleeing persecution and Australia accepts you and then gives you all the privileges it can give you, how is that not Australia assisting or giving you saviour or protecting your society?
Because most people are born here, Jason. That's the problem. Most Australian Muslims are born here, or they identify.
Yeah, well, I'm talking about those
saved by the government. They're Australian Muslims.
And see, okay, all right, okay, stop. My point about that were people who are refugees, who are fleeing persecution, who come to Australia, which there'd be many in the Middle Eastern communities of the city that I live in who've had that experience.
They're not even getting in the country.
Oh, they're not being locked up. They're living in Australia.
All right, guests, I'm calling time on this part of the conversation. Time out on this part of the conversation. Let me just move it forward just a little bit. So part of the issue with these counter-terrorism measures is perhaps a sense of feeling that this might be fueling Islamophobia. So, Dr. Jamal, let's visit that as an idea. Do you feel that there's more Islamophobia in Australia right now?
Before, I just need to say that terminology, Team Australia, is a dog whistling terminology taken from the book of John Howard, and it has changed after we met with the governor, with the Attorney General about it. Right. Definitely there is an Islamophobia, but it is upon the Muslims community in here to show that this Islamophobia is ill-placed, and we need to work as a responsible citizen and show our commitment to Australia, and at the same time working with the government to counteract all the negative messages that is sent by the barbaric state, and because the safety of these young people is as being our kids is very important, but definitely we can counteract this Islamophobia. Unfortunately, there are too many worldwide events out of our control that is impacting on that debate. Nevertheless, we shouldn't give up. We should stand up for our right as a responsible citizen, and we should claim that we are not a religious that is condone the killing of innocent victim, non-combatant journalists. We need to state this very clearly.
Yeah, I think that one thing we tend to, just for the international audience, we need to make it clear that we have a very high proportion of highly educated Australian Muslims. We have one of the highest rates of university entry, of professional success. So the Muslim community that's coming through now is extremely different to the Muslim community who migrated here 30 or 40 years ago. So there's a huge potential for Muslims to tackle these areas. But for these young professionals who grow up as Australians, to be told, to be indicated they may not be part of Team Australia, and to be targeted as part of this community, or to be seen as part of a community that is involved in violent conflict with beheading, in criminal actions, it's very, very difficult for so many of these young Australians who are contributing very valuably to Australian life. That's I guess, where the touchstone is, sure, that we have a very multicultural, multi-ethnic community, which is very active, but it's kind of suffering under all of this rhetoric.
So, Silma, we heard where the touchstone is, but I want to bring in this tweet because we got this from Madison, who really sums up this debate. Whenever the government talks about terrorism, people panic, and religious and racial hate spreads. All Muslims I know have faced it, this person says. So, Silma, what would you like to see done?
Well, I'd like to see it not targeted at Muslims. I'd like to see it recognised for what it is, a criminal action. So, for example, in conflicts in other parts of the world, you pick on the conflict and you pick on what's right and what's wrong. You don't pick on the religion. So we don't have a fear of Russia invading the rest of the world. I mean, I know that ISIS is trying to put this message that we're going to take over the world, but I think we all need to stand against it and say, look, what you're doing is wrong. You're perverting our religion. It's a criminal action, and deal with it as a criminal action. And when we talk about laws, bring in those laws so that they are across the board, and they are, for example, as I said, one where nobody should fight in any conflict overseas, including the IDF. This would be a much fairer law, because otherwise you end up by favouring some groups and discriminating against others. Okay. And certainly there is a feeling that Muslims are being targeted, and what's even, as Dr. Jamal mentioned, under the old legislation, they can still pull people off planes without any evidence. So there is still a very great fear that Muslims are going to be targeted, as they have been in the past.
You've just been listening to Silma Aram. We also had in this conversation Yasser Morsi, Dr. Jamal Rifi and Jason Morrison. Thank you very much for getting up at crazy o'clock in the morning to be part of this discussion. Really appreciate your time. Now Monday, a look at Hong Kong's Occupy Central movement. Protesters in Hong Kong vowed to continue their fight for democracy, but how tolerant would China be? Send us your thoughts on that and see you next time. Thanks for watching.